So at long last, we're ready to start diving into the Java CompletableFuture API. And we're going to see this is a big API, so we're going to start out by giving kind of a bird's eye view of everything, and then little by little we'll dive into each of the different parts of the API so you can learn how all the methods work and how they fit together and how they complement each other in various ways. So the entire CompletableFuture framework resides in one public class with over 60 methods. So it's pretty daunting. If you go look at the API for CompletableFuture, you'll be like, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. Oddly enough, it pales in comparison to the number of methods in the reactive streams APIs, which have hundreds of methods. So this is a good starting point to learn APIs that are vast. This framework implements the Facade pattern. The Facade pattern is a Gang of Four pattern from the Gang of Four book, which provides a uniform interface to a set of interfaces or a set of features in a subsystem that make the subsystem easier to use. So rather than exposing all the classes that are nested underneath or within the CompletableFuture class, that's all hidden from you, and you just have to worry about the Facade. As weighty as it may be, it's still much easier to deal with than all the other stuff that lurks under the surface. And again, there's like some 20 or so nested classes inside of the CompletableFuture file, which also has, regrettably, very few comments. So it's a good thing to use ChatGPT for if you want to try to reverse engineer what it's actually doing. So let's start by talking about the way that the API is decomposed. So we're going to start out with a bird's eye view. This is a famous picture that was taken by one of the Apollo missions called Earthrise, and it's basically the Earth coming into view from the moon, which is kind of cool. So this is about as bird's eye as you're going to get. Some of the CompletableFuture features are very basic. These are things that come from the underlying Java Future interface. So things like, is something done? Is something complete? Or sorry, is something canceled? Is something cancelable, or can you cancel it? Can you get the results? This is really not that much different from just using the conventional future interface. There's one or two other methods here, like join and complete, but aside from that, it's not really providing a whole lot of extra value, but it's there, so those things exist. All the other methods are much more interesting and much more advanced, and of course, not surprisingly, more complicated to understand and to program. Let's start with the first set, which are the factory methods. And as you might expect, as is always the case, factory methods make things. So the factory methods are going to do the initiation of asynchronous computations without requiring you to create the threads yourself. You can let those threads be done behind the scenes using the framework. And we'll actually look at how that works later. We'll walk through the code. And there's 4 methods here that are used to provide asynchronous factory operations, both one-way and two-way operations. Most commonly, you do two-way operations, so the supply async methods are much more common than the run async methods. If you think back to the underlying reactive programming principles, factory methods like these help to make your programs more elastic by leveraging a pool of worker threads, which are managed for you behind the scenes. The next stage, the next phase of methods, the next group of methods are called completion stage methods. There are a lot of these. You can see that about 2/3 of the methods in the Java CompletableFuture class are completion stage methods. And we're going to subdivide those up into further groupings when we get into this in more detail. At one level, most of these methods are used to chain dependent actions that are called or triggered when asynchronous operations complete in order to process the results of those asynchronous operations. And there's a class called completion stage, which is, it's an interface called completion stage, and the CompletableFuture class implements that interface. And so there's, again, a boatload of methods that are implemented from the completion stage interface. You should definitely take a look at completion stage and its header file, its Java doc, in order to understand how these things work. It's described quite nicely. Something else you can do with completion stage methods is trigger actions, these dependent actions, based on one or more prior operations. So when a previous asynchronous operation completes, then you can trigger one or more things in response to that. And we'll see there's some really cool things you can do by chaining this stuff together. This set of capabilities helps to make your programs more responsive by not blocking the caller code or the calling thread. So this is another one of those reactive programming principles that are supported by completion stage methods. So that's the end of the first set of groupings. Now we're going to talk about the second set of groupings, which of course we'll talk about the other things we didn't get to, like the exception handling methods and also the arbitrary arity methods, which sound a lot more mysterious than they really are.